All right, I think we'll get started. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the applicant briefing for this International Green Corridors Fund feasibility studies competition. It's being funded by the Department for Transport and being run in partnership with the Marine Institute Ireland, because we're looking for UK-Ireland collaborations in this competition. We are recording the webinar and this recording will be available to you afterwards. It will, on the Innovation Funding Service competition page, you will be able to find this recording eventually under the Dates tab. Please also be aware that on our YouTube channel, there are some videos that give further information about applying into our competitions. So please do take a look at those. And we'll also have 2 Q&As during this webinar, one sort of at the scope section and one at the very end after we've given all the process information. So feel free to type any questions that you have throughout the briefing. If you could use the Q&A box or the Q&A tool in the toolbar rather than the chat, that would be great. So we can keep all questions in one place. That would be really good. But yeah, please type your questions in as we go through and we'll read them out at the relevant times. So my name is Abby Wood. I'm competition leader at Innovate UK. And with me, I have colleagues from Innovate UK, also our partners at Department for Transport and the Marine Institute Ireland. So I will introduce them now. So this is our agenda. To give an introduction to the programme run by Department for Transport, we have Matt Brickell, who's the Senior Policy Advisor in UK Shore. To talk about the Marine Institute Ireland, or the Irish Maritime Development Office, we have Liam Lacey, who's the Director there. I will give a brief introduction to UKRI and Innovate UK, and then I will hand over to James Lovett, who is Innovation Lead for Future Maritime Technologies here at Innovate UK. So he will talk about the scope. We'll pause for questions, specifically about the scope, because I will be moving on then to other eligibility and process things. So that first Q&A is really for anything that has been said so far. Then I will pick up the application process and go through eligibility, how to apply, including any UK specific requirements. And then my colleague, Veronica Cunningham, who is the Research Funding Officer Manager at the Marine Institute Ireland, she's going to talk through the island-specific requirements. And we'll conclude with a final Q&A. So with that, I'll hand over to Matt to take you through his introduction.
Amazing. Thanks, Abby. And I'll reiterate the welcome to everyone and thank you all for coming and for those watching the recording later. As mentioned, my name is Matthew. I'm from the Department for Transport and I'll be providing some background on the fund itself and how it fits into the wider UK R&D programme itself. So if we just move to the next slide, please. I'll start with an overview of kind of the UK's maritime decarbonisation teams, who we work really closely with to deliver this funding and understand the bigger picture. So going from left to right here, we have the domestic policy team, who are critical to delivering that regulatory framework that's necessary for delivering our net zero ambitions. Second, we've got the international team, who are working really hard at the International Maritime Organization, or the IMO, to represent the UK and make sure that their policies are really ambitious. And finally, there's the team that I'm in, the UK Shipping Office for Reducing Emissions, or UK Shore, which is an R&D focused team responsible for a number of funds targeting accelerated technology development through the technology readiness levels for clean maritime. So I'll move to the next slide. So what does UK Shore do? Sorry, next slide, please. There we go. What does UK Shore do? Hopefully many of you are familiar with some of our funding streams and have applied and successfully got some of them, but I'll give a short overview of our existing structure for those who aren't so familiar. So we fund through the TRL level, so all the way from low to high. And at that low level, we've got those transport research and innovation grants. So they're very, very small micro grants handed out. So there's very early stage ideas and concepts. At the same time, we've got the Clean Maritime Research Hub, which is headed out of Durham University, which is looking again at that academic level and the really scientific principles behind all of these things. At the mid-TRL level, we have probably the most well-known competition, the Clean Maritime Demonstration Competition, of which there have been 4 rounds to date. And it's been extremely successful in demonstrating those mid-TRL technologies and really accelerating those technologies. So at the high level, we've got ZEVI, the Zero Emission Vessels and Infrastructure Program. And that's at that even higher level where we're really getting significant operation out of these projects and really showing the technology at a scale. So hopefully that gives us a brief summary of what UK Shore does. And that brings me to my next slide, which is targeting the International Green Corridors Fund itself. It really began from feedback from Green Corridor feasibility studies that were conducted in earlier rounds of the CMDC and highlighted the importance of having funding available for organizations in both countries in order to conduct the most effective feasibility studies. So from the beginning, we've worked closely with our international partners to form this fund. And it was first announced, hopefully you saw it at London International Shipping Week 2023, and was formally announced last week by Lord Davies. The UK and Ireland Fund, so if we go to the next slide, is a really important part of the International Green Corridors Fund. And
oh dear, I think we lost Matt there. Okay, I think Matt's frozen. Not sure what happened there, but I think he was almost at the end of his section.
Sorry.
Sorry, Matt, you froze up there.
Apologies. Well, basically, I'll hand over to say that it was really important that we're running this fund, and the collaboration is super important. And I'll just hand over now to Liam Lacey from the Irish Maritime Development Office to continue the presentation. And thanks.
Thank you very much indeed, Matt. I just want to go through broadly what Matt has been speaking about there, but from an Irish perspective. The greening of shipping corridors is an important issue for Ireland for many of the reasons that Matt discussed, but the greening of shipping corridors between Ireland and the UK is even more important given the importance of the trading relationship that we enjoy with the UK, and that works in both directions, of course. Next slide, please, Abby. So just to explain a little bit about who we are the Irish Maritime Development Office, and the operative word there is development. Our job is to develop the maritime industry in this country. And, very typically we would be developing the maritime industry along economic lines, but the green agenda has become so much more important. It's an important constituent metric that we use now to measure how the maritime industry is performing, and that's driven by national legislation and by EU legislation. We report directly to the Department of Transport, and the Department of Transport are significantly involved in and supportive of this project, while overall the IMDO exists within the Marine Institute, and we're very lucky to do that, given the resources that exist within the Marine Institute and the broader mandate that the Marine Institute has right across the marine spectrum in Ireland. And the Marine Institute reports to the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. There's lots of crossover between our mandate for maritime issues and the marine element that the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine are responsible for. Next slide, please, Abby. So our interest in this project, the purpose of the call is to support the creation of green corridors between Ireland and the United Kingdom. The call is co-funded, as Matt referred to earlier on, by the Marine Institute and Innovate UK to a combined value of 1 million in research investment, and we hope to have that matched by 1 million in funding from industry. The importance of green shipping corridors between Ireland and the United Kingdom cannot be overstated. Ireland's most significant trading partner is the UK. 90% of all of Ireland's trade, international trade, moves by sea, and within that, 70% of all of our roll-on, roll-off traffic moves between Ireland and the UK. So it's important to us to have efficient, competitive corridors, and as I said earlier on, increasingly important that those corridors would be green and sustainable. We have mutual trading interests and important social and cultural ties to protect, and this project is capable of doing that. And then allied to that, of course, we have the imperative of reducing carbon emissions from maritime transport, which is a key driver of this project and of equal interest to us and our colleagues in the UK. Next slide, please, Abby. We're very pleased to be working with Innovate UK on this joint call. Our collaboration is made very easy because of the existence of aligned ambitions to improve connectivity by creating green corridors. It's clear that our trading relationship, or the trading relationship between Ireland and the UK, is going to endure, notwithstanding the challenges which we've had to overcome in the recent past in relation to Brexit and the COVID-19 pandemic. Our trading relationship is still flourishing, and our job is to ensure that that continues to be the case. The call in many ways is testament to our shared resolve to succeed in improving maritime transport links between our respective countries. Next slide, please, Abby. So the message to everybody listening in who has an interest in this call is to go forth and create consortia, collaborations that can make green corridors between Ireland and the UK a reality. Without wishing to be prescriptive in any way, we do envisage that those collaborations will involve ports and shipping companies, third-level institutions and research centres, potentially professional services firms, domain consultants, etc., etc. And we look forward to receiving ambitious, creative and exciting proposals from you that will have the effect of strengthening trade and tourism links between Ireland and the UK. We wish all participants success in their project, and we hope that their success will bolster the trade and tourism links that we enjoy currently with our nearest neighbour. Just finally to say, I'm very grateful to our colleagues in the Department of Transport and in Innovate UK, who have been a pleasure to work with and extraordinarily professional in the way they've conducted their business. So it all augurs well for a successful project, and we look forward to receiving your applications. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Liam and Matt. I will just quickly mention us, Innovate UK and UKRI. So Innovate UK is part of UK Research and Innovation, and we sit along with the 8 other research councils, and we work with the UK government to invest over 7 billion a year in research and innovation. So we are the UK's innovation agency, and we drive productivity and economic growth by supporting businesses to develop and realise the potential of new ideas. So we believe that innovation is at the heart of the UK's future growth and prosperity. And we know that innovation accounts for up to 50% of productivity. And businesses that consistently invest in R&D have greater productivity and are more likely to export and generate growth. So with all those introductions, we'll now start to talk about the scope of this competition. So over to James.
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, for those who missed my intro, I'm the innovation lead for maritime at Innovate UK. So I'm looking after the delivery of this competition from a sector point of view. Firstly, thanks to Liam and Matt for the great words of intro. We're really excited at Innovate UK to be part of this as well. It really is a sort of a first for us to pioneer these green corridors feasibility studies, and we're glad to be involved. I'm just going to talk quickly through the scope of the competition, which is a bit complex, so do pay attention because there's a few nuances here and there, particularly being a bilateral competition. But the first thing I just want to mention is a couple of key points really for the first the first things to be aware of. I should make you aware that this is not the eligibility criteria of the competition that I'm about to present. Well, it kind of is, but Abby is going to be doing that in more detail later on. So for key eligibility criteria, please do listen to Abby's presentation after my scope Q&A. But the important thing I want to make clear is that this is a bilateral competition. With match funding from both the Department for Transport in the UK and the Marine Institute in Ireland. So basically what that means is there's two pots of money coming into these projects, and as a result there needs to be collaborations between the UK organisations and Irish organisations. So you must have both sets of organisations in your project. And so and as a minimum, and we're quite strict on this particular eligibility point, there needs to be a UK registered port or harbour involved, an eligible Irish registered port or harbour involved, and an operator, a UK or Irish registered business that is a vessel owner or operator with a vessel operating on a route between the two countries involved in your consortium. And it seems like quite a strict requirement, but it's really just to ensure the commercial pathway and the actual success of these green corridors in the future. We want to make sure the actual people who are going to be key players in a green corridor are actually involved in these projects. So we've got these minimum requirements on eligibility. Abby will explain obviously a bit further later on. What I will say is, because of the complexity of this scope and the competition, if you're unsure about anything on eligibility or scope, please do reach out to us. We're more than happy to talk through what you're proposing and whether it's going to fit in with the scope and eligibility criteria of the competition. The contact details are on the screen there. For UK organisations who are looking at this briefing and looking for the UK as part of the application, please contact Innovate UK at support@iuk.ukri.org. And for Irish organisations, please do contact the Marine Institute at funding@marine.ie. We will be willing and able to help. Next slide, please, Abby. Another thing to note that's important, some of you may be involved in bilateral competitions before, some of you may not, but the key thing about this one is that we are only using one application. So there's only one application to be submitted on the Innovation Funding Service. Again, Abby will go into a bit more detail about what that really looks like in terms of making your application a bit later on. We are not requiring a separate Irish application to be submitted. However, we do require Irish costs to be registered sort of in a separate form, which will get sent to Ireland. However, it is still all part of the IFS application. And again, we'll explain a bit what that means. The Irish organisations who are involved in these projects, just as a little bit of sort of system functionality reasons, mustn't put their project costs into the IFS application, but in a separate appendix and a separate template that you attach to the application. Again, we'll explain it a bit, and please do contact us if it doesn't make sense even after our explanation. Unfortunately, if you do request grant funding as an Irish organisation in the IFS application, it won't be eligible and your application won't be sent for assessment. So it's really important you get this right. I wanted to get this point out very early on because it is such a key bit. If you're unsure, just do contact us. Okay, next slide, please, Abby. I'll move on to the actual aims and scope of the competition. So the competition aim then, as Liam and Matt have explained, is basically to fund innovative feasibility studies into routes that stimulate the early adoption of promising long-term solutions to reach zero emissions in shipping. So this is a joint Irish and UK project with Irish and UK organisations, and you must be conducting feasibility studies, technical and economic feasibility studies, associated with the development and, importantly, the real-world demonstration of a green shipping corridor route. So that means we're hoping these feasibility studies will move on into demonstrations following the studies. The aim of these, another aim of these, is that you must be assessing and developing a clear implementation plan for the real-world establishment of the corridor. To qualify as a corridor for a green corridor, basically you need to plan for at least one zero emission, that's well-to-wake vessel, to be transiting a route between the UK and Ireland, similar to the Clydebank Declaration definition. Next slide, please, Abby. The requirements of projects going into this are essentially your project must underpin a future green shipping corridor demonstration by delivering meaningful technology, route to market and supply chain innovations. We recognise that this is a technology problem, hence why we're using a sort of technology competition for it. We need to achieve market potential through a clear strategy for commercialising the technology and the products, demonstrating the potential for significant value to the UK and Ireland. Your project must illustrate potential greenhouse gas emissions reduction that could be achieved by the future green shipping corridor. And importantly, the project must bring together a team with the necessary expertise and experience to deliver the project objectives, and include at least the 2 ports or harbour authorities I mentioned, and 1 vessel owner operator as detailed in the eligibility. Next slide, please, Abby. So there's a few things that we require at the end of the project that you need to think about at this stage. Apologies for the next few bullet points, there's quite a few, but they're all very, very important. What we want to see out of Green Shipping Corridor feasibility study. So the first is to produce a clear and detailed costed plan for how the corridor will be demonstrated in an operational setting. We don't want these feasibility studies just to be studies. We want them to move on into demonstration, as I said. And the operational setting must be between ports and on vessels, and you must be detailing your technical approach, the objectives, and the business case. You must, at the end of the report, estimate the annual additional costs of delivering the corridor, considering the various market participants, for example, the ship owners, the ports, the fuel or infrastructure suppliers, with clear plans to meet the costs covering both private and public funding sources. You must, at the end of the project, estimate the direct and indirect environmental impacts from delivering the corridor, including impacts on greenhouse gas and air pollutant emissions. Obviously, a key factor in these green corridors. And you must estimate the scope for scaling up the number of zero emission vessels and corresponding landside infrastructure, replicating the corridor elsewhere, and potential additional benefits to other routes in the wider fleet. Next slide, please, Abby. A few more. So your project must, by the end of it, investigate potential scalable zero emission energy source options for the corridor, estimate the quantity of energy required each year with a clear plan for how this would be produced, imported, distributed, stored, and bunkered, and the conditions to mobilize and meet demand. You must consider the design of the zero emission vessels that be used on the corridor. For example, are they going to be new build? Are they going to be retrofit, with a clear plan for how the vessels would be delivered? Must determine how the fuel will be safely and effectively supplied and bunkered and stored on board vessels, if you're looking at fuels, and include a plan for how the corridor would comply with all relevant regulations, for example, safety regulations. Next slide, please. The project must explain understanding of barriers to market adoption. It's going to be a key point of these studies. You must detail the resources needed to carry out the real-world demonstration following the feasibility study, including what the funding requirements are, what the timescales for delivery, the planning permissions needed, implications of current and future regulation, new partners, and information for a clear business case. You must develop a clear plan for disseminating the learnings and data from the corridors across the industry, and share your findings with us all at the DFT, Innovate UK, and the Marine Institute Ireland. And the final point there, so successful projects, you will be required to engage with us and any third-party contractors appointed by us as well. So do expect us to take a keen interest in your projects. Next slide, please, Abby. On regulation, just a small point really. So projects, you must obviously be detailing your plan for compliance with regulation and how you'll work with the relevant regulatory bodies for novel technologies. So there's all sorts of regulations going to be in place here. We didn't list them all in the scope because there's just a lot of it, particularly with the bilateral element. But at a minimum, you should consider the regulations associated with the vessels and the safety regulations in the ports and the harbours for each country. So do detail that plan because it's going to be a key barrier that needs to be overcome as we move forward into demonstration. Next slide, please. The types of vessels we're not very prescriptive on this. Basically, the green shipping corridors can be for all sizes and categories of maritime vessels. They're in scope. So basically, all solutions are available. So it could be for one target, size of vessel, or multiple. And both pleasure and commercial vessels are in scope. Next slide, please. The types of infrastructure, again, are not very prescriptive. They can involve all types of ports and harbours that are in scope, and it includes infrastructure for freight, passenger, pleasure, and commercial vessels. So again, fairly open on that. Next slide, please. Make you aware that we are using a portfolio approach in this competition. So we want to fund a variety of projects across different technologies, routes and markets, technological maturities, themes and locations. So we call that a portfolio approach. the Department for Transport, Innovate UK, and the Marine Institute Ireland reserves the right to prioritise the projects within the specific themes where necessary. So that comes into when we do our selection of the final projects. We take a look at the portfolio associated with all our projects, and obviously consider the different categories I've just mentioned there. Next slide, please. There are a few things that we're not funding as part of this competition, so you should be aware of these. We're not funding feasibility studies for a domestic green corridor in these competitions. So that is a UK to UK route or an Ireland to Ireland route. The reason for that is because we're looking at the international collaboration here in a big way. And for the UK organisations, at least, there have been opportunities to look at domestic green corridors in other funds within the UK Shore programme. We're not funding projects that are focusing only on increasing the efficiency of current conventional fossil fuels and fossil fuel powertrains of maritime vessels. So we are looking for a step change here, and it should be a fairly obvious exclusion to bear in mind, I think. We're not funding projects that are focusing on non-methanol biofuels, which is quite a key thing to bear in mind. So for these routes, we're not looking at non-methanol biofuels as a focus. And we're not focusing on personal watercraft or PWC, jet skis, sometimes known as. I wouldn't want to be crossing the Irish Sea in a jet ski anyway myself. The other projects include, we're not funding projects that are focusing on the use of production of synthetic fuels. This does not actually apply to the methanol, ammonia, and hydrogen fuels, but other synthetic fuels are not really what we're looking to focus on here. We're not looking for projects that are focusing on the use of submarines and submersible vessels, nor are those covered by existing commercial agreements to deliver the proposed solutions or a duplicate of existing innovation. Next slide, please. We cannot fund projects that are dependent on export performance. And as an example, the baker example is given a subsidy to a baker on the condition that it exports a certain quantity of bread to another country. And we cannot fund projects that are dependent on domestic inputs usage, for example, giving a subsidy to a baker on the condition that it uses 50% UK flour in their product. So try and put your metaphors from bakers to ships and ports if you can. Next slide, please. So I think that's the end of my scope section. Yes. So I think at this point we'll pause for a few questions of what I've just said about scope. As Abby says, you can put your questions in the chat, and my colleague from Business Connect will be able to read them out. You can also chime in with a vocal question if you are feeling brave. So I'll take them now, if that's okay, Peter.
Yes.
So not the chat, James. The Q&A box, ideally.
Q&A. Sorry, Abby. Yeah, Q&A.
I am monitoring both just in case, because invariably we do get both. Yes, we've had two questions so far. One from Tim Chilton, who works at Ordnance Survey. What is your view on the connectivity between greening maritime corridors and the greening of the rest of the ecosystem? Potentially we make improvements to maritime that are then lost or negated on land, perhaps poor siting of infrastructure. What are your thoughts about the importance of that interconnectivity for this fund?
Yeah, it is important. We should make aware, it should be clear that this is kind of bounded. This competition is bounded by the ports and the vessels. However, we do allow scope for to further benefits beyond the port wall, as it were. And good projects should be looking at the supply chains involved and really what's the interconnectivity with the maritime system. So we're keen to obviously have projects consider the holistic kind of transport system and the supply chain system, obviously, but we need to focus on the green corridors themselves for this particular competition. I should say that Innovate UK do have a wider transport team that focus on the other areas of transport in particular, and included in that is all sorts of supply chains that go along with the transport system. And we do a lot of interconnectivity work on sort of interconnecting transport. So Innovate UK do a lot of work in that. For this particular competition, though, we are just focused on the maritime vessels and the maritime ports and infrastructure and the supply chains associated with them. So it's a very good point. It is all interconnected, but we do need to bound it somewhere for this competition. I hope that answers your question.
Fantastic. Thanks, James. We've had a couple more come in whilst you were answering that one. So the next comms about this funding suggested it would be for routes connecting the UK to the Netherlands, Norway, Denmark and Ireland. Will future rounds cover other destinations beyond Ireland?
Yep, good point, Victoria. Thank you for the question. Yeah, so this is just an Irish specific UK Irish specific competition. As you've noticed, there has been mention of a UK Netherlands competition, as well as a couple of Norway and Denmark activities as well. There is definitely going to be a future competition round for the UK to the Netherlands. So that's going to be a separate competition with a separate briefing and a separate competition scope. And for the Norway and Denmark activities, these are actually going to be UK funded procurements. There will be more detail released about those in due course. But for this call, this is just the UK Ireland competition working with Irish collaborations.
James. The next is why is this competition funding only biomethanol but not other biofuel options such as bio-LNG? What's the criteria for this exemption?
So yeah, this is a big question, a good question, but a big question. It's fitting in with our roadmaps at the moment that we're only wanting to consider methanol, biomethanol, because we think that methanol is going to be one of the fuels of choice for the future of maritime corridors. We have excluded other biofuels for various different reasons. I won't go into them in this call, but just be aware that they have been excluded. It's only the biomethanol that's included.
Fantastic, thanks, James. And so far, the last of the current questions: will this exclude a Northern Ireland to GB routes, shipping routes between NI and Republic of Ireland are limited, and include a third country?
Okay, so yeah, we're not funding domestic UK corridors, so we're not funding routes that are just purely Northern Ireland to Great Britain, just to make that clear. So yeah, this is only looking at routes between the UK and Ireland. We recognise, of course, that shipping is not as simple as just doing one route back and forth, but there needs to be definitely a connected UK and an Irish port. So at a minimum, and it could be on a network, of course. You need to explain that in your application as to how it benefits and it actually classifies as an Irish to UK route.
Fantastic. I think that's all of the questions so far.
Great. Any people want to be vocal? Because I'm more than willing to take an articulated question on words. Nope. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, everyone. I just mentioned, yeah, if you have further questions, this is not the only chance to ask them. Do come into our support lines. We can answer them offline as well, for sure.
Okay, thanks everybody. I will therefore move on to the eligibility criteria. So this is very important. Your application has to be eligible in order to progress through the competition. So firstly, I will just mention, possibly not applicable really, but you can use a previously submitted application to apply for this competition. And that means one that was submitted and assessed previously, which you can update based on previous assessor feedback. But this is a sort of breakdown of the main eligibility criteria. So all partners within a consortium, whether from the UK or Ireland, as James said, will complete an application jointly on the Innovation Funding Service platform. To start an application on IFS, which we're going to term the organisation acting as the lead applicant, you must be a UK registered business of any size. This is for our system functionality reasons. The lead must then invite in their project partners. And as a minimum, the project consortium must include a UK registered port or harbour, an eligible Irish registered port or harbour, plus a UK or Irish registered business that is a vessel owner or operator with a vessel operating between the UK and Ireland. And just to be clear, UK trust ports and UK municipal ports will be treated as businesses. So there must be at least 3 eligible organisations in the consortium. It may be that an Irish organisation wishes to lead on the project itself, and this is fine, and you can make that clear in the application, but it has to be a UK business that starts the application on IFS, and this is just because it's the UK platform that we're using for this competition. Your project's total combined UK and Irish costs must be between £50,000 and £250,000, which equates to about €59,000 to €300,000. Projects must start by the 1st of October this year and end by 31st of March 25, and the project duration must be no more than 6 months. You can include other partners in your consortium, such as other UK or Irish registered businesses, academic institutions, charities, not-for-profits, public sector organisations, or RTOs. But the minimum requirements are those stated on the previous slide. Subcontractors are allowed in the competition and should be from the UK or Ireland. However, make sure that any subcontractor costs for Irish partners do not exceed 20% of the total Irish grant request. If you want to use subcontractors based in countries outside the UK and Ireland, you will need strong justification for this, and you'll have to say why you couldn't use anyone from the UK or Ireland. You can also include partners that do not request any grant funding. So, for example, organisations from outside the UK and Ireland, but you will need to state their costs within one of the cost questions, and they will count towards the overall total. We want projects to have a balanced contribution of costs among the partners from the participating countries. So no one country can represent more than 65% of the total project costs. We also say the project work must be done in the UK and Ireland, and all businesses in your consortium must be separate, legal and non-linked entities, because we want to ensure genuine collaboration and not just internal company research. And I'm just going to quickly hand over to Veronica from the Marine Institute Ireland, just to talk about some of the Irish considerations.
Thank you very much, Abby. So I'm just going to quickly run through some of the aspects to consider from the Irish partners. So it's the budget, the available funding and the allowable costs, what the evaluation criteria are and how they might affect the Irish partners, the application process in terms of our Irish national regulations, and we've also provided a budget template for the Irish partners to include, which it then goes in with the overall submission. Next slide, please, Abby. So in terms of these allowable costs, as Abby has mentioned, we allow for staff costs up to 6 months in duration, beginning from October 24 to March 25. Relevant consumables and publications, which may be some background documentation that you need to publish or previous papers that have been published on this area. Travel and subsistence in terms of project meetings. Overheads then are allowed up to 30%, and that's of all costs, including subcontracts. Overheads is not subject to any verification. Subcontracts are allowed for external services, which may be something like a market survey or use of some specialist expertise. There's a 20% limited, and normal public procurement conditions have to be followed. In terms of how that's calculated, if you're requesting €60,000, then your subcontracts could not be any more than 12,000. That's per individual partner, Irish partner. Next slide, please, Abby. So as we've said, the Irish partner budget template must be completed and submitted as part of the application, which goes up on the system by the UK lead partner as nominated. The template is already set up for 3 Irish partners, but you can add more if required. The template is available by emailing funding@marine.ie, and we'll reply to you pretty much straight away. The grant aid rates that are allowed are for small, medium enterprises and micro enterprises up to 75%. And for your large multinational companies and large enterprises, it's 50%. Grant aid is awarded under the de minimis regulation, which is €300,000 from January 2024 to individual companies or enterprises. Next slide, please, Abby. As Abby mentioned earlier, the combined UK and Ireland total project costs must be between €59,000 and €300,000, and the equivalent in sterling of 50,000 and 250,000. And again, as Abby mentioned, the costs allocated to the Irish partners, Irish organisations, must be between 35% and 65% of the total combined UK and Ireland costs. So it's very important when you're preparing the application in collaboration with the UK partners that you bear this in mind. However, multiple applications can be submitted by the same applicants. So, you know, hopefully that this will allow for different routes to be considered. We're contributing as part of this joint call €500,000 in grant aid. So that's the net cost. Thank you, Abby. The next slide, please. So the participants, again, as both James and Abby has mentioned, from the Irish side, Irish businesses, which can include the Irish port or harbour or Irish vessel owners or operations. And again, there's 3 that are obligatory, and then you can add other organisations from both the Irish and the UK side as you require, which can include your higher education organisations or your other public research performing organisations. However, these cannot lead. And you could also have other private research performing organisations, which could be something like, for instance, the Irish Whale and Dolphin group, something like that. Next slide, please, Abby.
I think that's your bit done.
That's it. Thank you. I'll hand you back to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Veronica. Okay, just continuing on with, this is also part of eligibility as well. So the rules on making more than one application, well, there aren't really any rules, because you can lead or participate on any number of applications, really, and the same for businesses and any other UK organisations. And the key dates to bear in mind, so the competition opens on Monday, so you'll be able to start applications then, and it closes on the 30th of May. It is important to note that the deadline is 11 AM on the dot, so the system will automatically close at that time. We cannot accept applications after that. So for that reason, please don't leave it too late to submit. I'll come to that again. But also notifications, you'll be informed of whether or not your application has been successful on the 18th of July. I'm now going to run through Innovation Funding Service application portal. So this is where the UK business partner will start an application and will invite in their consortium partners as part of the overall application. If you haven't seen it already, this is what the competition page sort of looks like. So if you go to the Innovation Funding Service webpage, you'll be able to use a keyword search to find this competition. And when you click into the title, you'll see a tabbed view of all the elements of the competition brief. So that's the eligibility criteria, the scope, key dates, how to apply, and all that sort of thing. So when you're happy to apply, so we recommend you read through all of that information. And then when you're ready, from Monday onwards, you'll be able to click Start New Application. So to apply for a competition, the lead applicant, which must be a UK business, will need to create an account on IFS. If you've applied for previous competitions through IFS, you'll just be able to sign in or reset your password if you need to. UK registered businesses should use the Companies House lookup to search for their organisation. This gives us your Companies House number. But research organisations should enter their information manually to ensure that they're not listed as a business on IFS. And for Irish partners that are invited in by the UK business, you will be asked early on if you're based in the UK. So after saying no, you will then have to enter your organisation details manually. And then the first section of the application is project details. So this is where you can invite in colleagues to help you complete the application. And this is where the lead applicant will invite in the partner organisations, who will also have to set up an account on IFS. As the lead, you should just make sure when inviting in your partners that you add them as the correct organisation type. Partners, please just make sure that you have been added as the right organisation type. Each person on the application will have access to some equality, diversity and inclusion questions. So we do ask that everyone completes these, but the lead applicant must complete these in order to be able to submit the application. Under application details, you need to give the title of your project, its duration and the project start date. But just remember that projects need to start by the 1st of October this year. Then there is a mandatory question about the subsidy basis, and all partners, including Irish organisations, will be asked if they are located in Northern Ireland and if their activities will affect trade between Northern Ireland and the EU. So this is a question that we have to ask in all our competitions, so it's sort of inbuilt and standard. Irish applicants should tick no to all these questions because obviously it only applies to UK organisations being funded under the UK Subsidy Control Act. But all partners do need to answer the question and mark the section as complete. Okay, you won't be able to submit the application. That will flag up an error if partners haven't completed this section. For the project summary, just give us a summary of your project and what makes it innovative. And then you'll also be asked to write a public description that would be suitable for publishing if you're successful. And finally, we ask you to describe how your project fits the scope of the competition. And this is important because if we deem your proposal to be out of scope, then it will be made ineligible and it won't be sent for assessment. As James mentioned earlier, if you're unsure about whether or not your application is in scope, then please do contact the relevant support line, and we'll give those contact details again at the end. And then the next section is the application questions. So this is what they all are. The first 3 must be completed, but they're not scored. They're sort of for our information only. But 11 of the questions will be scored by the assessors, and each question has detailed guidance associated with it. So make sure you fully click through into the full question so you can read all the elements of the question. They will have bullet points in the guidance to help you know what to include in your answer. So please make sure you read the full question. The questions do have differing word count limits, so take note of those as well. And some questions have an appendix requirement. You'll see here questions 5 and 6 have an optional appendix requirement, so you can attach that to your question to support your answer if you wish. Questions 10 and 11 have mandatory appendices, so you need to include those. There will be a maximum size and number of pages given within the question, and these appendices will need to be uploaded as PDFs. And then for question 14, which we've all alluded to, there will be an Irish partner cost template attached to the question. So there will be a template included within IFS for you to download. As Veronica said, you can also email them for that as well, but it is in the question, and your Irish partners need to complete this template and add the extra tabs if you need to. And then once that's complete, you need to reattach it to the question. So yeah, so in the response to the cost question, the lead, you can make sure all the information is there, but the Irish costs need to also be in this template. Yeah, because since Innovate UK is not funding the Irish organisations through the portal, we need to collect the costs through this template rather than in the finance section. So I am going to come to that in a second. But the other mandatory part of the application is this project impact questionnaire. There will be a link off to this in the application. Again, all partners need to complete this, otherwise you won't be able to submit the application. So these questions are to help Innovate UK to measure the impact that our support has on organisations and businesses and individuals. So they're not scored, they don't form any part of the assessment, but it is a compulsory part of the application. Then the final section to complete is the application finances, but UK and Irish organisations need to treat this section differently. All organisations will be asked, are you requesting grant funding? So the UK organisations requesting grant from Innovate UK will need to tick yes, but all Irish organisations need to tick no here. Okay, we don't want your grant request showing in this finance table. So even if you're claiming funding through the Marine Institute Ireland, for the sake of the application on IFS, you will need to select no here, because this section only applies to UK organisations being funded by Innovate UK. Then under the project costs heading, there will be a variety of cost categories in which to list out your project costs. The UK organisations will need to complete this section, and I will go over this again in a second, but Irish organisations need to enter zeros in this section. So your costs will be captured solely in the cost template in question 14, or the answer to question 14 as well, but not in the finance table. So this is an example of the project cost summary, once organisations have input all the details of their costs. So the lead applicant, which is the UK business, needs to ensure that all Irish partners have given zeros in these cost categories, and that their project cost total is not included in this table. And there should be also no Irish grant requests showing in this table. So only UK organisation costs should be shown here. If an Irish organisation requests grant funding in the application, as James said, you will be made ineligible and your application won't be sent for assessment. So the lead applicant needs to check this section before you submit. IFS will highlight to the lead applicant if there are any partners who have outstanding project finances to complete. All finances must be included in the application before the lead can submit, even if you are an Irish organisation just putting in zeros. You still need to mark the section as complete. Also be aware that IFS does not validate the total project costs. So you will need to check this. The lead applicant will must check the totals across both this section and the Irish partner cost template to ensure that the total project costs across the UK and Ireland are between those limits that we said, £50,000 to £50,000 or £59,000 to €300,000. The lead applicant also needs to check that neither the UK total costs or the Irish total costs take up more than 65% of the combined total. So please do check all these things before you submit, because these are key eligibility criteria and you can be made ineligible for them. And finally, before you can submit, all partners must agree to the draft terms and conditions. These don't actually apply to the Irish organisations, but in order to progress the application, we need all parties to sign the terms and conditions on IFS, where it's just a tick box. But for Irish organisations, your contract will ultimately be with Marine Institute Ireland. Once all sections are marked as complete, the lead applicant can submit the application. If you find you need to edit your application once it's been submitted, then this is possible as long as it's before the submission deadline. So you can reopen your application from your IFS dashboard. You can make any changes, but then you must remember to resubmit. Yeah, but it all must be done before the submission deadline. Nobody can edit after that. We do track site usage and submission uploads, and this table It's a bit small, but it's basically to give you an idea of when applicants submit their applications leading up to the 11 a.m. deadline. And a lot do leave it right up until the last minute. But we do always recommend that you don't do this, because we know that people often have technical issues. Your computer might crash. You might suddenly at the last minute realize one of your partners hasn't completed a section. So if the deadline passes, we can't accept your application. So please do submit in good time. And then once the submission deadline has passed, all applications will be checked. They meet the scope and eligibility criteria. And if so, they will be sent for assessment. We'll be putting 5 independent assessors on your application, all with the relevant expertise. They always remain anonymous. They cannot contact you about anything in your application that's not clear. So you need to make sure that all the right amount of information is in your application. Yeah, you shouldn't assume necessarily that the assessors are going to know what you're talking about. You need to make sure that all the right information is there. Then the assessors will score each section of your application, and the average score from the 5 assessors make up the total score for your application. We then at Innovate UK review those scores to make sure there's no outlying assessors who've sort of gone a bit off-piste. We can remove outliers if they haven't followed the correct rules and guidance for assessing. That's quite rare, but we do check that the assessment's been done properly. There is further information on our assessment process on our YouTube channel. There is a link in this slide, so if you get sent the PDF afterwards, you'll be able to click on that, or you can go to the Innovate UK YouTube channel for look at our assessment videos. So they might be helpful. Oh yeah, the videos are also, there is a link also in the How to Apply tab at the top in the competition brief on IFS on the competition page. So you can watch those if you need to. Just to say though, to receive any grant funding, your project proposal must be selected as successful by both the UK and Irish funding bodies. And if successful, UK participants will receive grant funding from Innovate UK, and Irish participants will receive grant funding from the Marine Institute Ireland. And just to highlight again, all participants must be part of one application submitted to Innovate UK. And now I will just hand back to Veronica just to talk about a couple of extra bits that are just specific to the Irish organisations.
Thank you, Abby. Next slide, please, Abby. So I'm just quickly going to run through the Marine Institute and where our role is. So the Marine Institute head office is based in Galway on the west coast of Ireland, which is raining at the moment, unfortunately, as usual. But we have 3 key roles as an organisation, which is a research performer, getting funding via EU Horizon Europe calls and national funding calls also, but we also are a research funder, funding nationally and internationally through different EU partnerships and also through JPI Oceans. In addition, we're a research promoter and coordinator in Catalyst, and this is a very important role that the Marine Institute holds. Next slide, please, Abby. So in turn, we have a number of legislative roles that the Marine Institute has to carry out in terms of monitoring and data collection. So specifically under food safety, so that might be looking at shellfish safety, nutrients in the marine environment, and contaminants such as heavy metals. We also manage the HABS program, which is harmful algal blooms, and we also meet the requirements, carry out monitoring to meet requirements under the Water Framework Directive and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, Natura, and Marine Spatial Planning. And the IMDO, again, would be, as Liam mentioned earlier, is key in monitoring the economic data, particularly on the shipping side. We also provide information and scientific, technical and strategic advice to government, the European Commission and a number of international organisations like OSPAR and ICES. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the Irish Maritime Development Office is very important in the development of maritime economy. Next slide, please, Abby. The Marine Institute, as I said, the head office is based here in Galway, but we also have research facilities in Newport, County Mayo, which is fisheries and aquaculture, which is both in freshwater and marine. We have two research vessels, the Tom Crean and the Celtic Explorer, which carries out surveys nationally and internationally. We have an ocean energy research test facility in Galway Bay and also in off the coast of Mayo with Sustainable Energy Ireland. We have a range of other scientific equipment and data management facilities, which could be useful, especially for the applicants. Next slide, please, Abby. So as Abby mentioned, the criteria for evaluation, it's very important that you address the published criteria. So the big picture is the main thing. So the strategic context of this call, again, covered by both James and Liam earlier. How your team is composed between the UK and Irish partners, and the skills and their track record that they bring for the collaboration. And again, multidisciplinary status of the team is very important. Value for money in terms of the output over the duration of the projects and the impacts for society in terms of reduction in greenhouse gases for the sector. Next slide, please, Abby. So from the Marine Institute side and also from nationally from the Irish perspective, we're delighted to be part of this call. And we're looking forward to seeing the outcome in terms of the reports and publication and recommendations, the new knowledge that will be generated, and how to sustainably manage and development both our marine and maritime resources, which will then be used for policy advice, both to the UK and Irish governments, again, which is quite important. So as part of for the Irish partners, they obviously need to consider the Irish context of the competition. Thank you. Next slide, please, Abby. So in terms of the next steps for the successful applicants, as Abby mentioned earlier, Irish project partners will be required to sign a grant agreement with the Marine Institute, and that includes the de minimis declaration. And I'll obviously put you through that process at the time. But if anybody wants to see the grant, the standard grant agreement, it's 12 pages long. It's quite short. I'm happy to send that on beforehand if you just contact me through funding@marine.ie. You'll also be required to submit progress and final reports because this duration is going to be quite short. It'll probably be one progress report and one final report. And payment in installments will be usually it's 25% up front once the grant agreement is signed, then 50% at the 3-month stage, and then final retention of the 25%. We'll be carrying out obviously verifications on costs, and provided all the deliverables are met, final payment is released. Payment is into the organisation's Irish bank account, and they'll require an Irish tax clearance cert for any payments over €10,000. Next slide, please, Abby. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, then please contact the Research Funding Office, either by email, myself, or my colleagues will be happy to assist you. There's one or two things that came up, I think, from the questions that I might mention now. In terms of the Irish costs, as Abby says, you just need to complete the template and then send it to your UK lead, and they'll do the rest. So do not enter the Irish partner costs in the system. in terms of the address, it's the Republic of Ireland address as per the Companies Registration Office, which is the equivalent of Companies House for the UK partners. That's it, I think, from my side. Thank you, Abby. I'll hand back to you.
Okay, thanks, Veronica. I will show this contact slide up again at the end, just in case you want to see that again. For now, though, I will go on to UK requirements. So this really only applies to the UK side of the project or the application. So we award grants now under the UK subsidy control regime, and this adheres to the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement and the Windsor Framework, amongst other agreements. And before making a grant offer, we do carry out financial health checks on your organisation. So you should make sure that your organisation is eligible before you submit an application. And if you're unsure at all about whether you can receive subsidy control, we suggest you seek independent legal advice. We can't really advise you on that. There is some more information on our website, and you can also contact our support team if you have any questions. If you're an applicant who's conducting activities that will affect the trade of goods and/or electricity between Northern Ireland and the EU, as envisaged by Article 10 of the Windsor Framework, then you will fall under European Commission state aid rules. And then in order to be eligible to receive state aid, you would need to pass the undertaking in difficulty test. This competition is being run under the Research, Development and Innovation Streamlined Subsidy Scheme and is for feasibility studies only. This means there are certain rules attached. For example, there is a limit to how many subsidies you can receive for the same project in the space of 3 financial years. You will be asked a question in the finance section about other funding received for this project. That means the same activities. Any funding you add here will be counted towards your overall limit of £3 million. It shouldn't prevent you receiving funding in this competition, but technically it needs to be declared. As previously mentioned, or maybe we didn't mention it, the level of funding awarded will depend upon the type and size of organisation working on the project. So IFS will calculate your grant request percentage based on your the answers that you've inputted into the finance section. So this means that depending on what size business you are, you will get a different funding intervention rate. So out of your organisation's project costs, you can receive up to 70% in grant funding if you're a micro or small organisation, up to 60% if you're a medium-sized organisation, and up to 50% if you're a large organisation. There is a link within the competition brief for defining company sizes. Research organisations that are doing non-economic activity aren't considered to be receiving a subsidy, so these rules don't apply to them and they can get 100% of their costs. Though universities will need to go through the Joint Electronic Submission System, or JERS for short, which I will come to. But then also the research organisations undertaking non-economic activity as part of the project, they can share up to 30% of the total eligible project cost. That's the UK project costs that are in the system. So this is just a sort of an overview. This is the amount of funding that you can receive depending upon your organisation type and size. So a lot of it is dependent on whether you're performing an economic activity or non-economic activity. These are some reasons why we would not be able to award you any grant funding. So if you have an outstanding final claim on another Innovate UK competition, if you did not fully exploit a previous award, or if you failed to comply with our grant terms and conditions. I touched on the finance section previously, so this is a bit more information for UK organisations only. So just be aware that we cannot award funding to overseas organisations, or if you're set up as a branch, or if you have no formal structure of ownership or control, and we can't fund anyone based in Jersey, Guernsey, or the Isle of Man. And we cannot fund any organisation based in one of these British overseas territories. This is an overview of the different project cost categories within the finance section of the application. So you will have to detail out your project costs using these categories. Now, there are various places to get guidance on how to complete this. So firstly, there is a PDF attached within the finance section on IFS that goes through eligible costs. So look out for that. There is a video on application finances on the Innovate UK YouTube channel, which goes through each of these categories. And there's also cost guidance within each category on IFS. You'll see there's a little blue link for guidance against each of these categories. So take care to look at what costs you can and cannot claim for, because not all costs are eligible. Now, this is where I talk about JES. So this applies to UK academic institutions like universities. So any UK academic organisations collaborating on a project, you'll need to complete a JES form, which they should be familiar with. And this form validates their costs for us. The form automatically calculates full economic costs and tells the partner what costs they can include in the application. So it's 20% full economic costs that get sort of deducted, and then the JES form will give you a total after those deductions, and then that total, 100% of that total, can then be claimed for within the application and inputted into the finance section of IFS. So Innovate UK doesn't have access to the JES system. So this is why you need to send that information to us. You'll attach, actually it's in the next slide. Basically, you complete the JES form, you input your unique reference number on IFS, make sure that the figures in your form match those that you input into the finance section, and then you attach that form, make sure it's with council status, and then you upload that as a PDF to IFS. We can't really help you with any JES questions, so there is a JES help desk, so please contact them if you get stuck. Then if you are successful in the competition, your project, or your application will move into the project setup stage, which is all done through the IFS portal. If you're unsuccessful, you will get feedback from the assessors after notification. So, you can use that feedback. Hopefully it will be constructive to helping you improve your idea and develop further in the future, potentially apply into another competition that allows for previously submitted applications. If you are successful, you will be signed a competition delivery executive who will guide you through the project setup process. In your notification letter, you will see that you'll be given an initial 5 days to complete basic details, like naming a project manager and a finance contact, and uploading your bank details. And then you will have about 75 days to complete the full project setup. So yeah, look out for all that. The communication will all be through IFS. So make sure you look out for emails or requests for information from IFS. You will need to upload a collaboration agreement and exploitation plan as part of the setup process. You will be assigned a monitoring service provider who will approve the documents you upload and your spend profile, and they'll also ultimately help support you during the project duration and will help you with your claims. And note that, unlike with the Marine Institute in Ireland, we pay our grants quarterly in arrears. And just remember as well that claims can only be made for costs incurred and paid for between the project start and end dates. So ultimately, you will get a grant offer letter through IFS to sign that will give you your official start date. So you should not, you cannot claim for anything that falls outside of that start date. And just before we get to the final Q&A, just a couple of things about support for UK organisations. If you receive an award, you will be contacted about working with an innovation and growth specialist at Innovate UK Business Growth. If you don't recognise that name, it was formerly called Innovate UK Edge. And these specialists focus on growing innovative businesses and ensuring that the projects contribute to their growth. So working one-to-one, Innovate UK Business Growth can help you to identify your best strategy, harness world-class resources and help you to grow and achieve scale. So that's basically the end of the presentation. So I will just hand back over to Peter, see if there's any questions to answer.
Thanks, Abby. Oh, sorry, James.
Yeah, can we just quickly mention the consortia building tool?
Yes, we will be sorting out a consortia building tool, as James just mentioned. Obviously, we understand that not everyone will have all the links and the partners at hand to complete the project. So we will be sending out a link after this. It will be simple registration, and then you'll put in your needs, requests, what you do, etc. And then you'll have a forum where you'll be able to meet up and start discussing partnerships. So hopefully that will help. Help you all. If not, I'll include my details when the slides go out as well, and I can help you form those consortia via Innovate UK Business Connect. That's part of our job, so happy to take those requests as well. And yes, going over to the questions, you've obviously all done a sterling job. We've only had 2 in so far, unless any more come in. So the first one is a container ship route from Northern Ireland to the Republic of Ireland to the Netherlands and back again eligible?
Yeah, thanks, David. Good question. Now, obviously, recognise that the routes aren't just back and forth from one place to another. There are networks of maritime routes across this whole region. What I would say is the Northern Ireland to ROI route is definitely in scope. Activities associated with the NL part, so the Netherlands part, are probably not going to be in scope of this particular fund. We are looking at UK Netherlands fund routes in a separate fund. So yeah, what I consider is only as part of this fund the UK to Ireland route, the leg of that journey. But with such a short journey from Northern Ireland to the Republic, it's not particularly well. You might have to consider the impact of that route versus others, and that what I mean by that is sort of the carbon emissions that you'll be saving, and some of the other bits and pieces in terms of wider commercial benefits. So do have a think about that. It's definitely in scope, but you definitely need to sort of have a think about the impact of such a route. So just to summarise, the Northern Ireland to Ireland route is in scope of that journey, but the Ireland to Netherlands route is not.
Great, thanks, James. And again, another question from David. Are UK-based SMEs supported at 75% intervention rate in line with the Republic of Ireland SME applicants?
I think this question was asked before. Abby gave a very detailed bit about SMEs for the UK. Abby, do you want to quickly touch on that?
Yeah, so just going back to the funding slides that we talked about. So the intervention rates are 70% for a micro or small organisation, and then up to 60% for medium-sized. So it will depend if you're micro or small or medium, and then large gets 50%. If that answers that.
I think it
I think
does.
so, yeah. Fantastic. And that's it for questions.
Okay, I did say earlier that you can ask questions on the voice, but apparently you can't. So if you're trying to unmute, you can't because it's a webinar. So if there are, I will stay on for the next 5 minutes or so, just in case there's any follow-up questions. But other than that, I'll leave it there, I guess. Oh, Liam, do you have one more thing to say? Was it a rogue hand?
No, if I could, James, just to mention to our audience that the Transport Research Arena conference is on in Dublin next week. If anybody listening in now is at the conference, we're there. We have a stand in the Irish Pavilion, we would be delighted to talk to you to talk about the construction of consortia or any other issues that arise. And indeed, James, I know that there's an Innovate UK presence at the event as well.
Yeah, thanks, Liam. Yeah, really good point. It's going to be a big event next week. It sounds like it's going to be exciting. I'm fortunately not going to be there myself, but my colleagues, the global team and sector team will be there to help out from Innovate UK point of view.
Veronica, did you want to come in?
Thanks, Abby. Just a quick thank you to colleagues in IMDO and both Innovate UK and the Department for Transport. Just to say you've been a pleasure to deal with in getting this call launched yesterday. And we're from the Irish side happy to deal with any queries from potential applicants. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. That's good to hear.
Yeah, so I've just put these contact slides back up. Obviously, these ones are the, if you need to contact Veronica at funding@marine.ie. And then we also have, for UK organisations, this is our customer support line. Got a number you can ring or an email address. So if you have any questions after today, you can contact one of these places. But I don't think we've had any more questions in. So how long do you want to give it, James?
No, I think we can leave it there. So thank you, everyone, and look forward to the applications.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for everyone on the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you all.